Okay, he's here, but on the phone, so if that's okay, I'll go ahead and get started. If that's fine. All right, so welcome everyone to this session, this is what I would call very early work between a colleague of mine at Rutgers University. Actually, I hired Andrei almost 20 years ago. I'm a emeritus at Rutgers, and I'm a visiting professor at Estonian Business School, and as of August 1st, I just joined SUNY, one of the campuses of the SUNY system, as kind of like a professor slash instructor slash bring research to the institution type of individual. So I have been around for a while, and I have always attempted to try and bridge that gap between what we would call academia and practice. I was raised on a farm, and my grandfather would always say, because his children were the first ones to go to university in his family, and his item was, you can think about milking the cow, or you can actually milk the cow. But if you just think about it, you don't get any milk. So you have to actually do something. So I've always tried to do that, and that's stayed with me. So what this presentation is and what it is not, I think it's extremely important that I set this up front, because this is very rough, and I mean rough, like a dog would be saying it, because Andrei and I kind of batted this idea around, and I had a former student who made I would say, an offhand remark that his son was working on this idea at the University of Bath, and I said, well, I have been trying to figure out how to get data on that idea, and so that was the connection. But the benefit from my perspective, or our perspective, not only from the academic perspective, but also from the practitioner perspective, is that it shows the new technologies that are available to us shows that there is some connection, and that connection can be used in a multitude of ways. And the reason why we thought that this would be some advantage, and this is mainly a pilot study, I would indicate to you, but the reason why this is of some advantages is because the new technologies out there of evaluating speech, tone, and facial expressions have started coming about, and they have become getting better refined and better refined and better refined. Whether that refinement is a good thing or a bad thing, there's always costs and benefits. So I think the jury is still out as to the net effect, but at least we are now finding that there are effects. So, but the contribution that we believe that we're making is not necessarily what you would traditionally think. A lot of work has been done on text, a lot of work has been done on voice. Not much work has been done on the facial cues, but no work that we know of yet that has done it down to the microstructure level. So we believe that we're the first ones to go at that level. But you never know, there's somebody always in the background doing something. So if you've thought of something, somebody's already done it a couple years ago and they didn't find anything, so they moved off. But we have actually found something. So at least we think we have found something. I was indicated by the I guess the organizers to write in plain language, not in academic language, and I'm going to try to do that in the presentation. What this paper and this presentation is not. The paper is not publication ready. It's not even close to being ready, and I don't even know if this presentation is close to being ready, but it is what we are trying to do and where we are. So let me give a little bit of a background, and this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek, and Antonio is on the phone at the moment, but the whole effort here is to kind of bridge this idea to work with the community, i.e. the professionals, to use their data to be able to provide any additional insights into what they're doing. And the particular insights to what they're doing, to what we are doing, is to be able to look at what we believe are emotional cues, or at least this company called Mood Metrics has created a very deep neural network learning mechanism to evaluate facial cues to get sense about emotions from those cues. And when Antonio mentioned yesterday about the risk and benefits of doing work with I would say the community, I have experienced the risk because when I was in Estonia, living in Estonia, I worked with a local fintech, and the shepherd of the project 6 months after we got there, when we were about to get the data, guess what he did? Left. So no one was there to be able to take it up. So hopefully I can pick that back up. But the idea is that there are benefits and detriments, and we believe that we're trying to do that and work with the community to be able to tell their story from an independent, I would say, as independent as possible, voice. And that's what our objective is. And so they're trying to sell their tools, they're mainly trying to sell their tools to high-frequency traders and hedge funds, and ours is really to see whether or not some of these new indicators of emotion, sentiment, can have an impact, and that's what we're doing. All right. So, so this was the tongue-in-cheek background, and this is what the academic background is. Is that central bank communications is, if you want to think about it, it's under such a microscope. No matter what is happening in the environment, everybody's like, all right, what did Powell say? All right, what did Lagarde say? What are they talking about? What will they do? And right now, it's kind of an interesting situation because in the U.S., there's I guess the futures are indicating that there will be a cut, but there's indications of that there's a kind of a wide range and low probability of what the actual cut will be. So there's kind of there's a theoretical aspect of it because everyone believes that whatever the central bank is doing is kind of like the base, and then everything builds upon the base. So parsing the statements used to be the thing. So it used to be, the kind of historical, you probably know this, but Greenspan was the first one to actually get his statements, his official statements, parsed. Every time the statement would come out, there would be tons and tons of practitioners who would be highlighting the words that were different from the previous statement. Just the single words that would highlight, this one was a little different, that one was a little different. And they were trying to indicate and trying to read, and what I call read the tea leaves, of trying to figure out what was going to happen. So essentially, we're doing the same thing, okay? We're doing the same thing, but at what we call a multimodal level, i.e. not just the text, not just the tone, but also what happens when the face comes out. And that's essentially what we're doing. But we're doing it down at the microstructure level, the second-by-second, tick-by-tick data, not longer-term activity to be able to see what's happening. You also may know that there is some actual work that when the official statements were being released, some people were getting access to the statements before they were getting released, and they were trading on those particular statements. So to be able to understand what's happening at the plumbing level of the marketplace, I think is somewhat important. And so that's what we are attempting to do. And we are trying to figure out. So what are these cues? And now I apologize, I may have to work over here a little bit, but I'm hoping to be able to show you what these cues are and how they operate. All right. So this is an example of a Powell speech. Now, all of our data from 2023, but this is an example. So essentially, there are, and I will show you the work from where this comes from. And it's not from the financial arena, it's the psychology arena. That's kind of the interesting aspects of this. We gain a lot of what I would call insights from non-financial sources, because if you want to think about sentiment, what does sentiment mean? That means what someone is believing. Well, that kind of goes to the core of psychological aspects and emotion. And that is, we always tend to think that that's kind of finance, that we're homo economicus, utility maximizing economan, but we're human beings at the core, and that is what forces. So essentially what happens is that we have these, and notice he's not speaking yet, so it's just his face. Now he starts speaking, and then we get these indicators of what's happening to his voice, as well as the particular indication of what's happening to language. So these are coming out, okay, these are coming out synchronously, or I guess with substantial small lag, or almost simultaneously with the actual statements and the actual speech that is coming out. Now this is only 30 seconds, okay? This is only 30 seconds, but this is the data that we are using, okay? And we have the timestamp, okay? We have the timestamp, and essentially what we have is essentially three big pieces, okay? Three big categories of data: the actual words, okay? The tone, and the facial features, and that's what's come out. Now, what are the foundations for these cues, and why do we believe it still applies? Because some people say, well, you can have a smiley face and really be kind of committing fraud. True. And then some people would say, well, in France, non means non, and sometimes it means oui. So, yeah, true. All of that works, but we do now have we do have some evidence, and we call this the Brooks support, where essentially they have gone in and they have evaluated the facial expressions, okay, and the facial expressions from a large sample of multicultural and multi-country individuals. And they find that there's a lot of commonality. When you are happy, the smile tends to be the same wherever you are. The frown tends to be the same wherever you are. And so the idea is that these are our bases for the cues to be used. Now, how did they do this? Well, they had this big deep learning neural network, multi-layered model, and essentially they've come up with that. And the people at Moon Metrics are employing that to the speakers of, actually to central bankers, as well as to CEOs or CFOs whenever they make earnings announcements. So that's what they are doing. Okay. Now we have three particular hypotheses that we are attempting to test with this particular analysis. Negative cues impair market quality, and our essential two main factors are we're looking at volatility and we're looking at the microstructure. And the microstructure is going to be spreads and depth. So when you think about a spread, the narrower a spread, the higher the liquidity, the deeper the depth, the higher the better the market. There's more stuff there. Okay, it's more liquidity. So that's kind of the idea. If there's quote unquote negative cues, then that's bad for the market. Well, that's true. Positive cues improve market quality, and when we think about that, that should be a decrease in volatility and an increase in spread. And then our third hypothesis that we're looking at is the connection between the nonverbal and the actual text, to be able to see the interaction. Because you can if you've ever acted as an expert witness, you read the words, but you don't see the emotion, you don't see the pause, you don't see the crying, you don't see all of that. You just see the words, okay? As if that is the only thing that matters. What we're trying to say is that that's not the only thing that matters. It matters what the expressions were when the words are stated. And that's what we're looking for. All right. So, I apologize for this particular slide, and this is the only one I'm apologizing to the professionals about, because I hate slides that look like this. But this is a small room, and this is our data, and this is too busy. But we have a lot of data, and so essentially what we want to talk about here is that what we have is what I would call microstructure friendly data. That means down at the tick level. So we've got these timestamp quantitative measures that have been supplied by Moon Metrics, and I'll give you three basic structures, and that is facial expressions, i.e. the face. There are approximately 48 what we call distinguishable states, anger, emotions that can come out. And then the prosody, and by the way, if I say parsody, I apologize for that, because that word prosody is hard for me to understand. It's hard for me to say. I understand it because it just means voice. Okay, it just means tone. And there's another 48 characteristics that are essentially being used. And then we actually look at the speech or the actual words that are stated, and then we make a connection to the raw textual statements. So the words, not just the words that are stated, the words that are written. And we look at that. And so that's essentially what we would say is our unique contribution, is being able to collect that particular data set. Now, I'm going to give you some problems with that in a minute, but that's where we are at the moment. And then we are using what I call some of the traditional financial sources of data. High frequency level now, and this is from TAC, which is the, for you non-academic, stands for trade and quote. It's a database that is available to most academics if your institution subscribes to that information. And we are looking at two financial instruments. We're looking at the treasuries, which is the TLT, that's an ETF, and we're looking at the spiders, which is supposed to represent the equity market, all right? Okay, and we are looking, and why did we select those two? Well, since we're talking about Powell, right, we're talking about Powell, everyone is going to be looking at Powell and saying, okay, interest rates, the bond market just, went up. What does that mean? The bond market went up. That means rates went down. So there's all kinds of potential miscommunications as to what a quote-unquote good response would be. But the main impact is supposed to be, the primary impact is supposed to be on the bond market, and then the secondary impact is on the equity market. But we tend to see that we have evidence that that works the other way around. Equity moves before the bonds. But we're just looking at those two big representatives of the overall market. Okay? All right, so what are our indices? All right, what are indices? There are our valence-based indices, and that essentially face negative, i.e., so as the face doesn't give a negative kind of emotion or cue, or a positive emotion or cue, whether or not the voice is positive or negative, and whether or not the sentiment of the text is positive and negative. And you may know this, but there was two academics from the University of Notre Dame, Lawford and McDonald, and they were the ones who kind of created the idea of using positive or negative words to evaluate whether or not sentiment was positive or negative in what we would call the 10 Ks in financial statement. Okay, so those are essentially the variables, and then our microstructure variables are the relative spreads, quoted depth, and intraday volatility, traditional measures. Our dependent variables are going to be the changes in liquidity and the forward-looking volatility. So essentially, if we have if we have a Q right now, what happened to the quote-unquote volatility 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds from now? Okay. And we have a ton of control variables, and we also do have the fixed effects and the fixed effects and time of day fixed effects in there, right? So there's a lot in here, okay? There's a lot in here. And some of this is kind of weird, and I'm hoping not to be focused too much on the weird part, but these are three big takeaways that I'm trying to offer you. Treasuries react to tone, okay? So the tone of the voice that comes out of Powell's mouth tends to impact the treasuries definitely more than it impacts the equity. Equities, on the other hand, tend to read the face, i.e. it tends to read the cues, okay, more than the tone. All right, so that's the idea. And then this is the worst part of what our project at the moment. We are struggling with this, and I'm going to try to give you an indication as to what we think is wrong or what we think is happening. Is that if you have a grimmer voice, oh, things are just so bad, that tends to calm the markets down. And that's why I put exclamation mark, question mark, exclamation question mark. How can that be? How can a bad tone or a grim tone, everything's going to be so bad, calm the markets down? Well, we are going to offer somewhat of a potential explanation. So what are our key findings? Okay, what are our key findings? So I don't want to get too much into the weeds here. I'm trying to paint a broad stroke. Our key findings are this. Negative vocal cues, okay, significantly predict lower 30-second volatility in the Treasury market. Now, one could argue that our proxy for the Treasury market, the ETF, really is not a Treasury market proxy because it's an ETF, it's an equity instrument. But we're indicating that it's supposed to be a proxy for what's going to be happening in the financial market, in the Treasury market. Okay? And so what are we saying here? Negative vocal tone tends to calm the market. And I'm a CFA charter holder, and when I was studying, I got into it because of my desire to learn more about equities, and my main mentor used to call, oh, everybody who loves bonds, they're just the Mr. Doom and Gloom. And so when you think about bonds being good, that was an indication that markets may not be as, quote unquote, excited about the future as you would think, and that's why I call it potentially the bear effect. Okay? Interestingly enough, negative facial expressions predict lower subsequent 5-second volatility in the equity market. Now, there's a problem in here, or I know a reviewer would indicate, if I'm acting as a reviewer, how am I able to say that it is true that there's that connection? Well, it's weak evidence, but the idea is that when I'm looking at 5, 10, and 30 seconds, I'm finding some indication at 5, finding some indication at 10, and finding some indication at 30. So the idea is that what we are indicating is that a negative expression or a grimmer tone essentially provides assurance to the market as opposed to being excited and exuberance. So that's what we're saying. Now, why potentially could that calm the market? And the reason why we believe it potentially calms the market is when negative news is stated confidently, that provides clarity. I.e., most people are not trying to sell you bad news, but if they make a statement that things are bad, then that means that they're trying to be clear. Things are not good. So there's some issues that we have to deal with there, but that's it. And we just have more work to do. Now, what about the volatility? Okay. Oh, by the way, I meant to mention. So we're finding counterintuitive volatility effects as well as counterintuitive volatility effects in the equity market. So the idea here is that positive emotion decreases volatility, but what we're finding is positive expression significantly increases volatility at the 30-second mark. How is that? We're finding negative at the 5-second, but then we're finding positive at the 30-second. So there's something going on there between when the quote-unquote expression is evaluated and when it's actually consumed or, I would say, interpreted. And so we believe that's something that we have to particularly work on. Okay? And the idea, to kind of go back to some of the kind of the behavioral literature, is that this kind of leads a little bit into a little bit more overconfidence. Okay? Now, how about liquidity? So that was volatility. All right? So volatility is one piece, and then now we've got liquidity. What we do see, and substantially significant, is a substantial decrease in relative spreads in the ETF for the Treasury bond market. And that quote-unquote 10-second is that 10-second hit is strong no matter which way we look at it. Okay, but we see a little weak positive evidence, but not statistically significant at the 5-second level. So what we are indicating that confidence and I would say calmness is something that is valuable to market participants. All right, now. What about spreads? Okay. So when we think about depth, we are indicating an increase in depth. What about spreads? Well, what we're finding is that negative cues narrow the 30-second spread, and the idea here is that we are seeing this quote-unquote potentially, quote-unquote, flight to quality mechanism happening at this particular time horizon. All right? So essentially so what are we showing? Volatility, we're showing an impact. Okay? Some of it is positive, some of it is negative, some of it is contradictory. Spreads or liquidity, we're showing an impact. It pretty much goes against what we thought we would find. And now what about the interaction between the verbal cues and the nonverbal cues? Okay? What we do see is that negative facial expressions predict lower depth, not spreads, lower depth, whenever we look at the combination of the facial cue and the actual word that is stated. So if we have a negative face and a negative word sentiment, okay, what we are seeing here is that that is a improvement. Sorry, it's a decrease in depth. So essentially what's happening here is that market participants are just pulling aside, waiting to see what happens, or at least that's the story that we're telling. Okay? That's the story that we're telling, all right? But we don't see any liquidity impacts, okay? We don't see any liquidity impacts in what I would say, the equity arena. We do see volatility, but not liquidity impact. Okay? When we combine the two, get into more details about combining the two or the interaction effect, all of a sudden we get very complex. Things get uglier, and that the standpoint is that whenever we see congruent positive signals, we do see a significant decrease in subsequent depth. So that's kind of that goes against what we would thought we would see. Okay, it goes against what we thought we would see. It's counterintuitive. Okay, it's counterintuitive. However, we believe that what's happening here is that when you see reinforcement of a negative statement, essentially what's happening is that demand for liquidity essentially evaporates. Everyone is calm, or at least that's the idea. Okay, that's the idea. What about negative tone and positive text? We do see higher volatility and lower volatility for equity. So that's a weird situation, and the standpoint is that the bond market is showing a different effect than in the equity market when you have incongruence between the word and the facial cue. All right, the word and the facial cue. All right. So what are our implications? Okay, what are our implications? So we've got some theoretical and we've got some practical implications. Number one. We believe that the evidence, even though it's a little bit contradictory in some cases, it does show that these multimodal data are important for microstructure indications, and that's what we believe. And also, too, not only is it important for microstructure implications, it's also asset specific, whether you're going to be in the equity market or whether you're going to be in the bond market. Okay. However, for the practical side, is that we do have low, what I would say, economic impact, low economic impact. But that doesn't mean that none of it generates low economic impact. It just means that clearer presentations tend to have greater impact than those that are confounding. Obviously, what's the problem? Okay, what's the problem? Well, we only have 8 meetings. We only have 1 year. Okay, we only have 1 year. I mean, we have only 1 4 like 4 terabytes of data. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's, just having 1 year is an easy thing to do. It's just we only have 8 meetings. All right. So how can we, I would say, generalize? And essentially, we cannot. Okay. We do have some measurement error problems. I mean, all of these measures that we're doing are noisy. Okay, they're all noisy, and essentially they're new. Okay, they're new, so we don't have a lot of evidence indicating what can actually happen there. We can't rule out endogeneity. Whether or not the scope that we're looking at, only looking at the bond market and only looking at the equity market, is really direct applicability, as well as our mechanism of transmission, our story that we're saying. It just, there's some problems there. Okay, maybe the biggest limitation came out in the Financial Times yesterday. I don't know if you're aware, but they have this kind of central bank party in Wyoming, and essentially that happened this past week, and the Financial Times came out with the twilight of the central banking elite. And I'm not exactly sure, I read the article, but the idea here is that maybe central bankers aren't having as much of an impact, or potentially won't have as much of an impact going forward because of people like that. Okay, because of people like that. Now, I'm not exactly sure, but if you look at that face, is that a smiley face or is that a frowny face? Now, obviously, this is not synchronous here, but the idea here is that central banks are supposed to be independent from the fiscal piece, and essentially, or at least the political component, but we know that they are not as independent as we'd like them to be. And that's the idea that came about it. So, merci danka, kiitos aita, and at you. Comments, questions, criticisms, I'm wide open. So, I think I am right on time. I think I'm probably 5 minutes over. Sorry. Yes?
I think it would be nice to apply this all the theory and analysis not only for Powell or other central banks, but also for the CEOs of some companies which are also giving their question and answers and representing their forecast. on
Yeah.
their results?
And Mood Metrics is actually doing that, okay? So when they have earnings calls, I mean, we know there's a lot of evidence about the transcripts, of reading the transcripts of earnings calls, and now they're starting to, I would say, multimodal the actual videos. It used to be the earnings calls were just on the phone, so all you had was the text and the voice. But now they're having the text, the voice, and the facial cues.
Yeah, especially those big companies like NVIDIA and that.
Oh yeah, and they're having them. Just as an indication, and I apologize that I don't want to let the cat out the bag, but we just got from Mood Metrics all of Lagarde's statements. So we are actually going to be applying what we just did in another market. So, yes.
How do you think the flow of information is within your sample?
I'm sorry?
How do you think the flow of information actually works in your sample? Because you have an algorithm to analyze this, and you spin this in this HFT kind of.
Yeah.
Are there HFTs already doing this, or is this rather people watching these videos and then reacting? Because I mean, it's not really ultra low latency what you have, right? You have the tick data, but then you have 5 second, 10 second, 30 second volatility, which is something that a human trader could do. So maybe in order to kind of disentangle this, to see if there are HFTs using that, or if it's actually human traders trading based on what they see, maybe going to a higher frequency and to a lower frequency to kind of disentangle this a little bit.
Well, and you're correct. I mean, this was the only data set that we had, okay, and so we had to try and make do with what we got.
But if you have TAC, then you can do like sub-second volatility and liquidity.
We can go down to the millisecond, but the problem is that we don't have the stamp from the...
But at least for like, your volatility measures are at least 5 seconds.
So
there you can go.
I agree. I mean, we're hoping to be able to get more what I would call granular piece of information from our alternative data to be able to better do a match down at the millisecond level, or at least the sub-second level, okay, sub-second level. So.
And have you looked at like prices, the directional effect? You have volatility, but are they going up or down? And can you predict this over also then a longer horizon, or is this all just short-term noise?
At the moment, we're only looking at it from the short-term horizon, only from an HFT's perspective, okay? And the answer to your question, I don't know how to answer it with 100% certainty, but I was told that they have clients. And so these clients are paying for their stuff. So I am assuming that the clients are paying for their stuff because they're getting value from their stuff. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I would indicate. So,
finally, I would also look at the FX market, if you can.
So on Lagarde, we're going to be looking at the FX market because Lagarde's coming from Euro and Powell's coming from US, and we believe that there's going to be a bigger effect in the FX market.
Yeah.
That's what we believe. So anyway, well, I don't want to interrupt. Yes, one last.
I'm struggling a bit trying to make sense of the interpretation you had, the cues and volatility. If market participants agree on the cue, regardless positive or negative, volatility should go down. Volatility emerges when there is disagreement.
Agreed. Okay. But I think what we're finding with the interaction term is that's what we're seeing. Okay, when you have positive face and negative tone, we're seeing more statistical significance, if that's possible. Okay, but we are also seeing the standpoint that whether it's positive, we're not seeing very much impact. When it's negative, we are seeing impact. So if there's agreement on the negative side, which is kind of weird, it's an asymmetric effect. Not on the positive side, but on the negative side. And we're seeing a bigger impact when there's incongruence. Okay, so and by the way, our story that we're coming up with is still, we are trying to explain how is it that we come up with these negative, quote unquote, bad news pieces being somewhat positive. How can that be? Or the other way around, positive news being negative. I don't know. So, okay. All right, well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate it. And I'm going to skip the floor now for the next presentation.